Welcome to the Middlesex Moments radio show. I'm Dr. Anna Wasesha, president of Middlesex Community College, and joining me today is Richard Patrick, who is a retired professor of political science. He taught here for decades, I'm guessing. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And when did you retire?
I think 2008.
All right. So Richard's one of those prime examples of people who retire but don't really retire. They just take all the energy that they had day to day working here at the college and put it onto different subjects. And most recently, in terms of his intersection with Middlesex, he organized some programs for Constitution Day. What is Constitution Day? You want to shed some light on what in the world is Constitution Day?
Well, thank you, Dr. Shasha, for having me here. It's a great opportunity to think about the Constitution. As you know, and maybe some of your listeners know, last week, Tuesday, was September 17th, and it was a commemoration day of the 226th anniversary of writing and signing of the Constitution by the attendees in Philadelphia in 1787. And here at Middlesex, like a lot of colleges, part of our students' learning is something we can call civic learning. So it was a great opportunity as a teacher to talk about a topic that I've been following for years and years, namely, what's the Constitution about? And last week's attendance on Constitution Day events had students from our honors seminar in which the students are thinking about leadership. And of course, the Constitution and the Founding Fathers, who I'll be talking about in a few minutes, had some ideas about what constitutes leadership in a republic, which we have being representatives. And then there were other students from the composition classes, and these students were required to think about rights in our country. And so they were there, and as a teacher, I'm always interested to know what our students are thinking about, and as a political scientist, I'm interested in if their education is turning towards political involvement in our community, what you and I know and what the college is doing in terms of this project of civic engagement. So it's a great opportunity for the students to come and think about the Constitution as it relates to their assignments. And it got me thinking more about the Constitution. It's amazing. That's the whole purpose of Constitution Day. I've discovered in thinking about this, the Constitution, in terms of our national political discourse, is never more than a few thoughts away. When people are in political discussions or are irate about some political issue, they'll invoke the refrain, that's unconstitutional, or is it in the Constitution? And that's great, because the Constitution is the framework of our politics in our country.
And it's so, you're right, exactly. It's frustrating to me because, I personally couldn't sit down and narrate what is in the Constitution, but I think we all have a kind of innate sense of how our government is structured and something of respect for that Constitution. Maybe not just respect, but also we use it to prove point in the political debates that we have in this country on the right and on the left, right? So yeah, it's
That's
strict
right.
Constitutionalists, and yeah,
That's
right. So well, we have a lot more to talk about, but we're going to take a break and hear from some community agencies doing fine work in this region. And when we come back, we'll resume our conversation about the Constitution. Well, welcome back to the Middlesex Moments radio show. Richard Patrick, a retired professor of political science who puts the lie in the word retired, is with me today. And we're talking about Constitution Day and the Constitution in general. And I just want to be sure that our listeners know that all public colleges and universities in the country are required to do something for Constitution Day because of Senator Robert Byrd, who used to carry a small copy of that Constitution in the breast pocket of his suit coat. And he was really concerned, as I think we all are, that we've lost touch with some of the foundations of government. So you put together, thank you so much, this fantastic presentation for our college community. And the title was, Is Social Media a Refresh Button for the Constitution? Tell me and tell our listeners what you were thinking about when you decided you were going to put together social media and the millennials with the Constitution, this document from 1787?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it is. And so, as a teacher, I'm interested in the politics of our college students, and I wondered whether or not the Founding Fathers would be alarmed or amazed, and if the politics of some of our college students would indeed cause alarm or amazement. So let me chat about what has emerged in the last two election cycles, in the election of 2008 and the election of 2012. The current college generation, called by social analysts the millennial generation, because we're in a new millennium, indeed are engaged in political activities that it's unprecedented. And let me discuss the kinds of things the millennial generation politics is about. First, I guess I need to explain what a generation is, because scholars from years ago have recognized that people group themselves in different ways, and the idea of a generation is an important idea in terms of a country's social fabric. Karl Mannheim talked about how people self-group themselves by critical social historical experiences. And there's this new generation that's becoming part of American politics called the millennials. The research from the Pew Research Organization and from Circle, which is an organizational study about young people's activism, consider a cohort of 18 to 29 as part of the millennial generation, starting really from the late 80s, the Reagan through the up to the Obama years, presidencies, in which there were some critical historical events, the wars that have occurred. The millennial generation have come of age, especially during the Clinton and Bush years of involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so their social and political consciousness and orientation in life is affected by those historical events, just like other generations. I come from the Vietnam War generation. My parents were part of the silent generation. And generation is an interesting concept to understand politics in America.
What was the silent? The silent generation?
It was after the turmoil of World War II, the 50s, the quiet 50s, the silent generation.
Sure.
Critical, in addition to social and political experiences for the millennial generation, is the advent of the internet and the advancement of the internet. So the millennial generation are being called netizens because of the internet. And here's where social media comes in. The internet with computers and computer applications has become just so much of the lifestyle. There's social media in which Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, all sorts of apps become part of their lifestyle. In one of the research findings, the Pew Research on Civic Engagement discovered that 83% of young people have the internet and social media as a daily, ongoing part of their lives. Of course, other Americans have the internet. And the internet and social media became an interesting new medium for political activism by the millennial generation, to the consternation of the Mitt Romney campaign, because in the 2008 and 2012 election, because of some of the activities of social media, the apps that our millennial young people are using, there was a boost for the Obama campaign. And even before the 2008 first election, during the Iowa primaries, young people were involved in galvanizing themselves through social media tools. This is an interesting thing, that young people, the millennial generation, are engaged in very deliberate forms of social engagement. The research shows that a large proportion of them engage in promoting political material. They use the social media to encourage others to vote. They post thoughts on issues. They encourage others to act. They set forward links on political stories. So social media is an interesting transformative aspect for us in our lives. Later on, I'll be talking about change and Constitution as being a product of change of the Founding Fathers. Social media as a mode of communication I might go there for a few minutes, was not unknown by the Founding Fathers. The framers of the Constitution gathered in the public pubs, and talked about the issues that became the revolution. And after the revolution occurred, change continued, and they envisioned an America with canals to unite the 13 new states, the Erie Canal system. The Erie Canal system would advance commerce, but they also recognized that the Erie Canal system would create closer communication, and what the Founding Fathers had hoped is better sharing of a national vision. And of course, I'm going to argue that Founding Fathers would be amazed at the millennial generation using the internet and social media for the kind of communication of issues that they had only a glimpse of and that they were engaged in. The millennials are having an impact because of social media. One study showed from Circle that 80 electoral votes from 4 swing states that were critical in terms of the disposition of preferences of the millennial voters, swing states like Florida and Iowa and Ohio and Pennsylvania, were it not for those swing states and 80 electoral votes, had the millennials gone for Romney, we would have a President Romney instead of a President Obama. And the millennials, as a voting bloc, or their activism and their preference, has had an impact on our politics in our country and who's going to become president of the country. Our millennial generation also have views that are different from previous generations, and that's why they're so distinctive, in addition to their large reliance on the internet for social and political activities. The millennial generation see themselves, according to the research, as disruptors, and that's characteristic of every new generation. They're idealistic, they expect change to occur, and the internet and social media becomes a tool in their expectations. Let's get things done differently. I once saw on PBS how some of the techies in Silicon Valley were loaned off by the firms to social issues in San Francisco. And these techies wrote these apps to facilitate the distribution of surplus food. And that's in the social area. Our traffic planning in Philadelphia, I'm always fascinated with how young people have a degree of energy and idealism to do things differently than the previous generations. So this millennial generation is having an impact. And of course, a really critical question is that, are they in keeping with the Founding Fathers' view of what politics in America should be all about?
I know. I'm just been listening to all of this, thinking a million different thoughts. It is sparking all kinds of questions in my mind. I understand that a part of the pressure upon the people who were writing the Constitution was they were trying to create a federated system of states that would actually have a national consciousness. Now, as you're talking about the millennials, I'm thinking, is there a gulf? I mean, then suggesting that there was a gulf between, say, Vermont and Virginia, and that they were trying to somehow bring them together. But now, in our time, is the gulf between this legion of people who are on social media all the time and the older people who aren't as well connected and therefore can't really forge a national identity as a block. I mean, if you're 30 plus, 30 to 100, there are many generations in there, but do they start to kind of, the differences wash out and you just become part of the older generation who are not disruptive and who are more concerned about narrow provincial issues than they would be maybe about the national ones? Because you're right, that youth culture is magnetic and it attracts other youth and it just builds and it goes viral, is the description. So we have just a few minutes left before we have to take a break. So what do you think about that?
Well, we'll have to turn to what was the political situation, the social situation for the Founding Fathers. And were there gulfs, and is the gulf getting bigger? I tend to see, obviously, there was a great diversity amongst the Founding Fathers. And so my answer to the question of would the Founding Fathers be alarmed or amazed as to current youthful politics, the answer is yes, they would be alarmed, but they also would be amazed. It's a mixed kind of analysis that I have. There is a great gulf in the thinking about the kind of politics that they set up for the country. The bulk of the Founding Fathers, both the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, subscribed to a belief in classical republicanism, a belief in kind of a natural aristoi. The Founding Fathers were exceptional in the sense of doing a lot of reading of past political systems from ancient Greece and the Romans and so on. So they believed in a natural group of leaders
who were essentially equivalent to
the
aristocrats.
Elites. Aristocrats, we would call them the elites. And they had a very jaundiced view of the masses because they were thinking about, after 1787, even before the spring and summer of 1787, the previous year, just up the road in Springfield, Massachusetts, a Revolutionary War veteran, Daniel Shea, with a lot of other disgruntled, overly in debt persons, didn't want to pay their tax due, and they staged a rebellion and took over the armory. And there was this famous Shays Rebellion, which got the Founding Fathers very worried about the masses and their qualifications to be part of the new republic. So they erected all kinds of what I call semi-democratic, what scholars call semi-democratic restrictions and obstacles to the mass involvement.
Isn't that incredible? Because, of course, at the same time, what we've got is a country that developed a system of public education so that the masses could be self-governing. But we have to take a break, and then we'll come back and deal with these huge questions in just a moment. Well, welcome back to the Middlesex Moments radio show. Richard Patrick is with me today, and we have been talking about the Constitution, but it's not just your old Constitution that you might have in a little booklet in your house on a dusty shelf of a bookshelf. It's the Constitution and how it got framed and why it's still operating today. So why don't you pick up where you were before with some of the issues about trying to restrict some involvement on the part of some of the masses?
The young people are really more active today than previous generations of young people because of the internet. Past studies show that political involvement was correlated to higher income, people being involved in their community, establishing their lives, and then having a vested interest in being politically active because of social policy. Now we have young people. Because of education is more available, and certainly the correlation still shows that because of schools like Middlesex, this jump in political participation is correlated to civic learning in colleges that is more widespread. Now, what fathers thought about this increase in millennial generation involvement? Well, they had conflicted views. That generation, the founding generation in the late 1700s, saw themselves as an exceptional group, and rightfully so. They were educated at Princeton and Yale and Harvard as new institutions. And only about 10% of the population, according to the census, the first census was in 1790, and only about 10% of the population were literate, who might have read the newspapers like the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers, and participated. Most people were trying to survive daily existence on the farms in a scattered new country. So the masses were seen as illiterate, and by the Founding Fathers prone to impulses and emotions, and prone to being manipulated by self-serving demagogues. And some of the Founding Fathers embodied, especially in the viewpoint of James Madison, one of my real heroes alive, were worried about the masses and what he called passionate factions manipulated by self-serving leaders. And the Founding Fathers in the Constitutional Convention just created political restrictions. Women weren't enfranchised. Poor white males, if they couldn't pay the poll tax or didn't have property tax, they didn't have political rights to vote. There was, again, in the beginnings of our constitutional framework, in election restrictions. There was no direct election of senators and of the president. It went through state legislatures, again, in which exceptional leaders would be in the state legislatures to select the senators and the would-be president through the device of the Electoral College. So historians have labeled even poor James Madison as not supportive of the people, of the principles of democracy. Well, I went to the literature, recent literature. One of my favorite scholars is a woman named Dr. Colleen Sheehan, who's written an interesting book. And over time, some of the Founding Fathers had a change of view about the masses. Because if you think about the masses today, the people of America in the new millennium of the 21st century, 99% are literate. And they're active. And I think some of the Founding Fathers, the doubters, underestimated their experiment at democracy. And they would be amazed at the transformation. So James Madison, in his lifetime, changed and shifted from his concern about the passionate masses and how they should be restrained. And there's been changes in the Constitution as well over time. There's a famous letter between Madison and Jefferson in which Jefferson is noted to say that every generation must create its own political society, community. And Madison came along with that point of view. Because fundamentally, Madison, Dr. Sheehan, in her book, looked at Madison's thinking about public opinion. Public opinion is related to the idea of popular sovereignty, the will of the people. And social media best expresses, is another medium, in addition to newspapers and elections, the will of the people. However raucous it might be, unvarnished, we're getting all kinds of views in those blogs and in those Twitters. And James Madison, in his shift over time from the late 1700s into the 1800s, began to appreciate the role of public opinion. There's a really critical paper that if one goes to, like Dr. Sheehan did, to the papers of James Madison, the public papers that I'd like to read sometime. He wrote a very influential essay on the influence of public opinion on government. And fundamentally, he really believed in the potential and innate intelligence and virtue of his fellow citizens. And he came up with, if one looks at the Federalist Papers has all kinds of precepts of the masses having this potential intelligence, assuming some civic debate rather than manipulation. He believed in the inherent intelligibility, one would have to, of the people if you believed in the principles of democracy and the popular sovereignty, the will of the people. But he also was prudent. He realized that public opinion could be unvarnished, but the Founding Fathers subscribed to liberty. You couldn't censor public opinion, and he believed in factions or groupings like the millennial faction, and there will be people who aren't part of the millennial faction or grouping generation. But he believed that a democracy does involve what Dr. Sheehan calls and recognized in Madison's essay as a commerce of ideas. There'd be a competition of ideas. And even before James Madison, John Stuart Mill and others that I've read in political philosophy subscribe to that the marketplace does have a distilling and a clarifying view. I tend to be kind of like reflective from my world travels. I've been to Greece and I've walked around the Agora in Athens of classical Greece, and I've thought about this idea of public discourse and debate. And James Madison read the classical theories about why the masses, however unvarnished, should count in the forming of policy. So in his later years, he and Jefferson embraced the importance of public opinion. Moving on to Jefferson, he's also another favorite hero of mine because, as you might recall, and some of the listeners might know, of course, Thomas Jefferson, there's a saying about him. He went to politics because of public duty. His real heart was in science and knowledge, and Thomas Jefferson was a scientist. And he liked technology, and when I've seen specials on PBS about Thomas Jefferson, he looked at the latest technological inventions, and he was the ambassador to France, and he was excited with some of the new inventions coming from Enlightenment Europe. And I believe Jefferson would have embraced the internet.
Yeah, it's a great idea. I was have you been to his house at Monticello?
No, I'm going to go there.
Yeah, it's a wonderful trip to make. And he had a device that had two pens in it. One you would actually manipulate, and the other one would make a copy. So he was already trying to figure out exactly how to make things easier and how to duplicate things with the tools he had at hand. And it is amazing to me also to think about how much traveling he did, given how incredibly difficult travel was at that time.
It is.
Yeah, you've raised my mind is just going in about 100 different directions right now. I was thinking about the elevation of the importance of public opinion, the millennials, the way that social media allows them to create a communication stream in their generation that, also leaks out into other age groups and other generations. And that's, maybe we think about that in terms of a United States experience, but actually we live in this complex world. Talking about Greece reminds me that there's public opinion that is global, but it's different in Kenya today, for example, where the shopping mall is being held by the Al-Qaeda group and people are being held hostages, than it would be, let's say, in Finland, where they're dealing with all kinds of issues themselves, an oil-based economy, and what does it mean for them? So then do we get to a point where are the millennials a global communication chain? And in that case, what does democracy in the United States Constitution say about that? And I'm thinking we're going to have to come back to it in another show, because those are such immense questions. I can't thank you enough for making me think about all these things. It would have been great to be a student of yours. I have this terrible feeling in my mind that I would have probably loved to take every course you ever offered, because I would love to be a student again, which is one of the nice things I bet about retirement, too, is you have time to actually think and read and chase down all these wonderful rabbit holes, reading deeply, reading the Federalist Papers. I'm impressed.
Well, thank you for the opportunity of making me think. about the Constitution in new ways and thinking about the millennial generation of our college students.
Right, right. All right. So, well, thanks so much, Richard Patrick. This has been the Middlesex Moments radio show. If you're interested, our listeners out there interested in learning more about the college, they can find us online at mxcc.edu. I'm Anna Wasesha, president of Middlesex Community College, wishing you a good day.